Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we're here to talk about the use and the importance of music in Alfred Hitchcock movies.
Hear that tune? It's that damn thing I couldn't get out of my head.
I can't get that tune out of my head.
There's nothing like a love song to give you a good laugh.
I can't tell you what this music has meant to me.
I am so glad to be making another video again, especially one that it's dedicated to Alfred Hitchcock's work, but I do feel super rusty talking in front of a camera again, so bear with me while I get the hang of it again.
That's right.
And it is quite a complex or extensive kind of topic. What I hope to cover or to give an overview of is not only the use of music in terms of the film scores of Alfred Hitchcock films, but a wider approach. I will try to provide examples of why music is so crucial in Alfred Hitchcock's films, and so I hope that this video is an opportunity to yet appreciate Alfred Hitchcock films even more from another perspective, and also learn more about Alfred Hitchcock's approach to filmmaking, and in this case to film music. So I won't go over his silent films. However, it was during that period of his career when he really started to realize the importance of music in films. As he said in an interview, one of the greatest emotional factors in the silent cinema was the musical accompaniment. In that interview with Stephen Watts, published in 1933, Hitchcock expressed that the basis of the cinema's appeal is emotional. Music's appeal is to a great extent emotional too. To neglect music, I think, is to surrender, willfully or not, a chance of progress in filmmaking. So it is clear that his keen eye for storytelling couldn't escape the fact that even in the silent years, music was an essential component to film even then. So mainly during his British years and onwards throughout the 30s, really involved using music as a plot device, as something that would make the action develop. So some fair examples of this particular use of music can be seen or can be identified in films like The Man Who Knew Too Much in his first version, The 39 Steps, Young and Innocent, and The Lady Vanishes in 1938. These tunes, these melodies set again plot points and even help solve murders. In The Man Who Knew Too Much, for instance, in one of its climactic scenes, probably one of its most remembered scenes, which Hitchcock also replicated when he remade this movie in the 50s with Jim Stewart and Doris Day, involves the attempt murder of a prominent man that is cued by the percussion during a concert in London's Royal Albert Hall. And this is practically the first proper introduction to what Jack Sullivan in his book Hitchcock's Music describes as symphonic suspense, and the integration of music not just as a score or as background, but also within the narrative. And Alfred Hitchcock would pick up again on this particular use of music also for the 39 Steps, also in a way that he would explore in other movies. In this case, the hero of the film, one of his most prominent tropes, the wrong man, the innocent man, accused of something he didn't commit and on the run, recalls or can't help to remember a specific song, a specific tune that he can't seem to get out of his head, yet he can't quite place. Something also along the lines to what happens in Shadow of a Doubt, but in this case, in the 39 Steps case, it is essential. The tune is essential to resolving the mystery and helping the hero of the story to exonerate himself. Once again, music is an essential part, a key part of the plot. And very much along the lines of The Man Who Knew Too Much, we have also the film Young and Innocent, in which there is yet another climactic sequence that involves an orchestra playing, again with the percussion being specifically important and targeted. In this case, the player of the drum is crucial to solving the mystery of the movie. And suspense then is really enhanced because you as an audience have the inside of what's happening. And also another component to Young and Innocent, which I particularly love in terms of Hitchcock's use of music, is the kind of snarky and sly choice of songs to further comment on the situation that you're watching and that you're learning about. And in this case, in Young and Innocent, the song that the orchestra is playing is The Drummer Man, and you hear the lyrics, and it is again kind of a sly comment on the whole situation, and this kind of inside joke that Hitchcock provides us through music, again through a song. I think it's brilliant. In The Lady Vanishes, once again, music and a particular tune is very important, and it helps the plot develop, and is also key to one specific character. And it is very important because within the context of the war, there is a message that is encoded in a tune. But not only that, also one of the protagonists of The Lady Vanishes has a profession directly linked to music. In this case, is a very quirky character, I should say, who is an ethnomusicologist who specializes in folk music. And if that's not niche, I don't know what is. Played, as many of you would know, by Michael Redgrave in his film debut. So this is again kind of an outline of how Hitchcock started incorporating music in the story of his films during his British tenure, because by the time Hitchcock was filming The Lady Vanishes, he was already negotiating to go to Hollywood and to start his career, his very prominent career in the US. That would totally change, of course, his possibilities in terms again of having access to all these resources and all these collaborators, and further expand his impressive and innovative use of music in films. His Hollywood debut, as many of you know, was with David O. Selznick's production of Rebecca, and this was also the first of many lavish and lush scores that Hitchcock would have in his movies. The composer of Rebecca was Franz Waxman, and also Rebecca launched his career in Hollywood as well because of the success of the movie and also the success of the score of Rebecca. One of the greatest achievements of the score of Rebecca is that it evokes a character that we don't see. In this case, I'm talking about Rebecca. This is a haunting and eerie score that in more ways than one impersonates or brings the image of a character, again, that is essential to the story but that we cannot see. Also, it is worth noting the innovation component that this score also had, because in order to achieve this eerie and haunting melodic score, they use an electric organ and 2 polyphonic nova chords. And we have to be reminded that this was 1940. Up to that point, the convention for film scores was that the music remained in the background with exceptions. But still, Rebecca remains as a prime example of this more noticeable and plot-orientated use of film music. Hitchcock would work again with Franz Waxman a year later for a movie like Suspicion, also with Joan Fontaine and Cary Grant. And although the score of Suspicion is not as remembered as Rebecca's, there is still again another particular use of music which can be also identified in Shadow of a Doubt, which is associating a particular song to a character, specifically the villain or the suspicion of a villain.
That's right.
And in this case is a waltz by Strauss, which were quite omnipresent in many Alfred Hitchcock films, and it's one called Wiener Blood, which translates into Viennese blood, and is a very recognizable waltz that you've probably heard at some point or another, which is used throughout the film to point out the kind of like illusions of grandeur of Cary Grant's character, who is not a very reliable character, so to speak. And one of the most paradigmatic uses of this particular waltz comes in the most iconic scene of the movie, which is the one in which Cary Grant carries a glass of milk upstairs, and accompanying him is a very particular arrangement of the waltz, Shadow of a Doubt, which was Alfred Hitchcock's favorite film of all the films he made, in which we see again another example of his predilection for waltzes. In this case, it's The Merry Widow, a particular melody with a particular title that alludes to the character played by Joseph Cotton, and that is also a tune that Charlie, played by Teresa Wright, can't get out of her head but can't initially identify, and it plays consistently throughout the movie during specific sequences. The score for Shadow of a Doubt was by Dmitri Tiomkin. In this case though, even though again it has similarity to the 39 Steps and to Suspicion in a way, the psychological component of the relationship between Teresa Wright and his uncle Charlie has an extra charge to this use of the Merry Widow waltz, and it alludes again to this very particular bond that seems very endearing at first and ultimately is very disquieting. And so this movie was also a precursor of this more intentional use of music to enhance the psychological aspect in a movie, which would be something that Hitchcock would further explore with Spellbound, a movie released in 1945 in the height of the popularity and the interest for psychoanalysis and Freud's theories, and film music and its score yet again help enormously to bring all these themes of amnesia, of trauma, of secrets to the surface. Spellbound's film score was by Miklos Rozsa, and it is one of the most well-known and most appreciated scores in Alfred Hitchcock's career. A beautiful one that, however, was not quite to the liking of either David O. Selznick, who was also producing the film, and Alfred Hitchcock, who considered it, I guess, too much on the nose in terms of the love theme that the score brings. But in any case, it is a beautiful score that also marked another innovation in terms of using electronic music, and that's because Spellbound is also known for the use of the theremin, which was an electronic musical instrument invented by Leon Theremin and patented in 1928. This was a music instrument that was not played as such, but it was instead controlled by movement of hands and electric signs, which is crazy, but it gives that very specific sound, which became the norm for eerie and haunting and horror films. Miklos Rozsa went on to win his first Academy Award, and even though this was his first and last collaboration with Hitchcock, still holds a very specific place not only within Alfred Hitchcock's filmography, but in the history of film music. And then another movie that I wanted to mention was Rope, released in 1948, which I think is worth mentioning, not so much for its film score, which apart from initial and final orchestrations is pretty much non-existent, but for its effective use of sound, of ambient sounds for suspense purposes, foreshadowing what he would do later in Rear Window. As many of you would know, Rope is quite an experimental film, not only in terms of editing, but in terms of recreating an apartment in a city and the different times and moments of the day. Also in Rope, there is yet another character who has a musical profession. So once again, music never quite leaves the spotlight in Alfred Hitchcock films. And speaking of Rear Window, this is really one of the most paradigmatic cases in terms of illustrating the topic of today's video, because Rear Window is, as it has been described, one of the most daring experiments in film music, and one that really influenced many filmmakers, many contemporary filmmakers. The composer of the soundtrack of Rear Window was also Franz Waxman in his fourth and last collaboration with Alfred Hitchcock, but there is not again a soundtrack per se, but really the use of source music that comes from the different apartments that we see in the film, and also the sounds of the city that really shape the musical dimension of Rear Window. This in itself was already groundbreaking, but also it incorporated several pieces of popular music, not only as background music, but with a very specific idea in mind, again as a way to comment on what you're seeing and explaining what you're seeing, such as That's Amore or Mona Lisa. And this is particularly poignant and clear in a scene in Rear Window in which you see one of the characters labeled as Miss Lonely Hearts by James Stewart's character by herself with an imaginary date, while we hear To See You Is to Love You sung by Bing Crosby. That is meta comment, meta score, if you will. It is also a film that really encapsulates many aspects that we've seen of the use of music by Alfred Hitchcock. Music is literally again incorporated within the plot. There is a character in the film that is a pianist again and a composer, and you literally hear a song being developed as the film progresses, and that specific tune is really relevant in terms of affecting other characters, and in this case saving the life of another character. So you can really see in Rear Window all these different ways of using music, of incorporating music within the plot, of making music a prominent part of movie making. This movie is again one of the landmarks of today's video in terms again of the use of music in Alfred Hitchcock films, but there are others as well, and we haven't yet even discussed the name of Bernard Herrmann, which I will do in just a second when I talk about a movie like The Trouble with Harry, a very quirky film, and it's now become one of my favorites, which was also incidentally the first time in which Hitchcock and Herrmann worked together. Hitchcock in fact had wanted Herrmann to score his films before, but there was never the chance until again The Trouble with Harry, released in 1955. And even though this movie seems quite a departure from other Alfred Hitchcock films, it was in fact one of Hitchcock's favorite film scores, and that is because the style of Herrmann perfectly matched Hitchcock's vision for what a film score should be, and he perfectly captured the tone and again the quirkiness of The Trouble with Harry. And he was so happy that Herrmann also felt it was like a musical representation of Hitchcock, so much so that he rearranged the music in a piece that he called A Portrait of Hitch. And this was not in fact original music that Bernard Herrmann composed for The Trouble with Harry, but he used several compositions that he had written for a radio program called Crime Classics, which he felt were perfect for the story. So in this case, the use of the music in this movie is quite important to tie up everything that Hitchcock wanted to say. And I also have to mention, of course, the second version of The Man Who Knew Too Much, which was remade into a film released in 1956, in which Hitchcock himself, along with the screenwriter John Michael Hayes, really worked together to further enhance the role of music within the plot. As many of you would know, also if you have watched the movie, there is one particular song also that is quite important and that it became really iconic, sung by Doris Day, Que Sera Sera, Whatever Will Be, by Jay Livingston and Ray Evans. And it's also really crucial in terms of the resolution of one of the main conflicts of the movie. And also we have, as I said, Doris Day playing one of the characters, a fantastic singer, and we can see even Bernard Herrmann in that climatic scene directing the orchestra. And this time it shows Hitchcock's evolution as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, and in terms of music, I think it showcases how important it was for him. And I think Rear Window and also The Man Who Knew Too Much, the second version, really illustrate also the power that music has in our lives in terms of literally saving our lives. And that's really true, both literally and metaphorically. In more than one way, music can save your life. I have to also briefly mention here a movie like The Wrong Man, in which also another protagonist is a musician, in this case played by Henry Fonda. This film is another departure kind of film for Hitchcock because it's based on a true story, very different from all these other experiments and extravagances that Hitchcock had accustomed audiences to. It was also a box office failure, probably because of that, but in terms of its score, we have another central character who is a musician. And now moving to the last part of this video, we only have to mention movies like Vertigo, North by Northwest, Psycho, and The Birds. All these movies also scored by Bernard Herrmann. Some of them, like Vertigo for instance, became one of the most representative pieces of music of Herrmann's work. He considered it his favorite of all the scores he did for Alfred Hitchcock, and is yet again, for Vertigo I mean, a case of, as I said before, of a specific tune really alluding to a character much like in the vein of Rebecca, a very haunting melody, and specifically in this case paired with the hypnotic opening titles of Spellbound. It is again one of the most iconic, groundbreaking moments in film history in terms of combining music and moving image. As long as North by Northwest goes, is kind of the same idea. We have once again the opening titles by Spellbound and Bernard Herrmann creating a really vibrant tune that sets the mood for the rest of the film, which is a constant race, a constant run, another innocent man on the run to save his life. I have to mention though that there is one particular and very iconic scene in North by Northwest, the crop duster scene, in which there is no music, no film score. The suspense in this case is led by the absence of music, but there are still sounds that are kind of informing the score of the film and the sound design of the film, because that also mattered a lot to Hitchcock, not only the use of music but the use of silence as well, or the absence of music, should I say. And there is yet again one of my favorite uses of music by Alfred Hitchcock in North by Northwest, and in this case is because he uses the song It's the Most Unusual Day right when the life of Cary Grant's character here is about to change and it's about to become a nightmare of sorts. And it's so funny that he really inserts It's the Most Unusual Day right there. It's the Hitchcock touch. And then we have Psycho, yet another mega recognizable score, and it is yet again another very innovative use of score in Alfred Hitchcock movies. And in this case it is another kind of daring approach to music score, because Bernard Herrmann only used string instruments to put together Psycho's score by combining violins, violas, cellos, and contrabasses. And to better illustrate this point, I really like a quote by its screenwriter who was very impressed by Bernard Herrmann's music, Joseph Stefano, who said that Herrmann had taken everybody's guts and used them for music. And I think that it perfectly illustrates what he did with strings in Psycho's film score. It is one of the most impressive scores in film history once again, and a very important reason why also Psycho has remained such an iconic film. And discussing silence also, or the absence of music in this case, also the famous shower scene in Psycho, which Hitchcock originally had conceived as a non-music sequence, and in this case it was Bernard Herrmann who convinced Hitchcock to really use music in this case, and I believe it was an incredible choice because the way it is edited, also the way it is cut, literally as the knife goes in and out, the music is essential to also mark this kind of sections and this rhythm, and it is a perfect matrimony between editing, visuals, and music that I think also speaks volumes about Hitchcock's brilliance, but also about Bernard Herrmann's genius. And finally, I'm going to talk about a movie like The Birds, because there is yet again a new innovation in terms of using electronic sounds, in this case for a movie that has no score. If you see the titles, the opening titles of The Birds, you'll read that Bernard Herrmann actually acts as a sound consultant, and the whole film is played by the sounds of birds, recreated in a very innovative, pioneering way of using electronic sound in films. There were instruments used like the mixer tritonium or the echoplex reverb unit. They were used again to echo the bird cries, to distort them, to burst them out, and it all works perfectly for the birds, combining natural ambient sounds and the eerie, really scary and really haunting sounds of the birds. And on that note, pun intended, I'm going to end today's video because I already feel this is going to be a long video. I could go on and on with this topic. This is a really fascinating one, but for the purposes of today's video, I hope that you have had enough of an overview to realize that Hitchcock's approach to music, appreciation of music, and overall approach to filmmaking was really incredible, and that there is more than just the score. And I hope that when you watch some of the films that I've mentioned in today's video, you'll enjoy them even further. So before I go, I also wanted to thank everyone for your patience while I was away, for your concern and for your kind messages, because they really helped. I'm really thankful and really happy to be back. But in any case, as I always say, but now with even more meaning, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your love for classic movies. And as always, take care, stay safe, and see you all in my next video. Bye! Played by Robert Donut. Is it Donut or Donut?